discussions, I think I think it is important. I think the more these movements have to have these debates go on within the movement instead of people who are participating in them. So I don't know where to even start. I guess I'll start from here. Like I feel like lots of times when people talk about why they're opposed to gay marriage, usually it's something like, well, the institution itself is reactionary. It comes from a reactionary place. There's a Marxist analysis for this, there's a feminist analysis, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I think that, kind of like what Andrew's pointing out, like I think these things have evolved. I think these things have changed because of struggles that we've had, right, for like women's liberation, for gay liberation, et cetera. So I kind of feel like it comes down to these sorts of things where you can meet someone who's been married for 50 years and be like, these have been the best 50 years of my life. I'm just as in love with this person as I was 50 years ago. You can also meet people who are like, you know what, I've been married 50 years and this has been the worst time of my life. There's been domestic abuse, there's been all these other awful things. And I feel like, it's just kind of like, I would say like religion, right? You also have Marxist analyses and other analyses of like, where does religion come from? You can meet left-wing religious people, you can meet right-wing religious people, right? It's not about the institution itself, it's about who's participating within these things. So that's one of the things I would say about that. In regard to, you mentioned like a contract with the government about like being equal and all that. I mean, I think that right now the problem is that there's a contract with the government, about being unequal. You know what I mean? Like I think right now there's a contract with the government that says, we're going to deny you all kinds of things. And as Andy pointed out, that's going to legitimize all kinds of other violence. And the last thing I'll just say is I think that, I definitely don't think we have to put all of our bags in the marriage basket, et cetera. But I think that that's the key point, is that these movements aren't static, right? These movements evolve, these movements broaden out, these movements, and that's one of the important things because there are gays in labor, right? There are gays in immigration, there are gays in the military and all the other movements. And something like gay marriage points a way forward to unite these movements and to get people mobilized, to struggle for more things such as all the things that everybody else wants in here because marriage isn't enough.
So, wow, that was so much to respond to. I mean, it's very clear that, to me at least anyway, that this very like romanticized version of movement building that the ISO promotes has seemed to, for all intents and purposes, not worked in bringing the rev. But, I mean, the real question is, it exactly is about the institution of marriage, right? It's not about the people that participate in it. We can talk all we want, like, I don't care, like, I'm not going to judge someone for being married, because we can understand that there are rights that are accorded to those people that some people need to survive, right? The point is, I'm not going, like, because I'm not married, I'm not going to have health care, and because I'm not married, I'm not going to be given the rights that some people will have through that institution, and a lot of people in non-normative, non-monogamous, non-state sanctioned relationships will also be in that situation. So I guess that's a pretty I don't understand how we can see marriage as not a structural issue, and how we can think of marriage as non-institutional and not be taking into account the voices that aren't married, and the rights of those who are not married and not in that institution.
Speakers?
Well, it is a structural issue. I wouldn't say that it wasn't for a moment, but I think you're missing the bigger picture, and that is the question of full legal equality, of which marriage is an important part. It's one piece of a larger picture in that respect. In terms of the question of who chose and who didn't choose this issue, I think the fact that so many people did come out in the streets following Prop 8's passage, people were choosing, okay? And even before that, if you look at surveys of the LGBT community, bear in mind the first big wave of marriage rights activism in this country, the first big wave, I mean, where people actually were hearing the issue, came out around 2004. But you wind back the clock 4 years before that, there was a National Gay and Lesbian Task Force survey published well before all this, and this was of African American GLBT people. Respondents to the survey listed quote-unquote marriage/domestic partnership, end quote, as their number 3 top concern. That was before the big wave of activism. People were saying that. So to say that the national organizations chose it for actually is, I think, getting it backwards. The national organizations, as they do with everything, rush to follow everyone else.
Time.
Well, the answer, whether you're against negative legislation versus positive.
I'll come back if I can.
All right.
Yeah, I mean, actually, I want to address what Joey raised at first, which is, I think what you're asking is the conundrum that we find ourselves in, right? On the one hand, we have incredibly negative marriage amendments and so on, which are extraordinarily demoralizing to experience. And then on the other hand, you have this movement, which is also extremely demoralizing. How do we negotiate that? I don't have the perfect answer, but I think we need to keep that kind of equivalence in mind. We really need to keep that tension in mind, and this is why I say, let's not talk in terms of you're with us or against us, but let's keep in mind that there is a structural issue here. There's a way in which we are all being played against each other. That's the issue that we're not remembering as well, all right? Whether it's around labor issues, whether it's around marriage issues, and in terms of labor, we've got this whole supposed, which we've managed to squelch a little bit, but we've got this supposed dynamic between undocumented laborers and African American laborers, right? So there's always a way in which the structure plays one population against each other, and I think we need to understand this kind of structural issue. So I'm glad you raised that. Now, in terms of marriage evolving and so on, all I can say is no, because again, I take it back to Connecticut and Massachusetts. It's not evolving. What is happening, and again, this brings us back to another history of gay marriage. You have had this kind of weird sort of intentionality around gay marriage for a number of decades. What you really see in the 1990s, and this goes back to Joey's point, around 86 and the 90s, you get things like New York City, and you get the march, the annual Pride Parade in, I think, 1992. And you get this big split at that time between sort of mainstream gay movement. You have HRC coming up at that time, and then you have the sort of gay liberationists, as it were. And that's where you start to see the kind of neoliberalization and privatization of the state, right? You kind of see gay identity politics becoming part of a kind of public policy issues. So that's where you get, HRC and the others are advocating for Times Square to be raised because they, like the government, do not want to see those nasty, sex shops and so on in Times Square, right? So that's what you get, is you get a way in which gay identity gets used in these battles. And I wish we would remember that more often.
Dr. Thayer, we want to take two more comments from the audience, and then we'll have closing comments from both of you.
Giant abstraction.
He's fair.
Yes.
She keeps talking over.
Just over 1 minute for you, sir.
Oh yeah. Is this okay? Something a word that you used, Andy, that I thought was a really great word at the end of the first initial speech was consciousness. And I think what it's come down to is this is very much like a class conscious, struggle. And I just want to say that I've never really understood, I understand tension, but I don't understand both, if it's the same. Okay, what I'm going to say is we are moving towards a privatization, on healthcare, and I agree with that. It's like a working class struggle because of the way that, there's been an attack on women's reproductive health. This is a class issue. This is, both points bring up that this is a class issue, and the ones that are suffering are very much the workers. And that's all I have to say.
So I think something interesting that's being pointed out here is it kind of sounds like once we win this battle for marriage, there won't be anything left for the LGBT community to do, and that's ridiculous. I mean, the fight to end slavery and the civil rights movement happened a while back, but I still see groups on my campus like Act on Racism, people still involving themselves in the movement to combat racism. And this kind of thing of like an institution, I mean, voting and all these other institutions were once that of a white, straight, property-owning male. So women wanting to go to school, fighting for an institution that once was just for a male, women wanting to vote, black people wanting to vote, these were things that once were only part of, you know, the heteronormative white male things. But I think it's a violent view to have, to know that there is a movement happening right in front of us and to be on the side that counters that movement. And I think something else I wanted to cover is this idea behind theory and practice, because I think we kind of tend to mentally play around with the word like queer theory in our minds and kind of visualize it. Yeah, I want to be queer, I want to be different. But the practice of it, you don't win movements by yourself. You win movements as a class of oppressed people, moving forward, mobilizing. You don't win movements as a queer in a white room by yourself. You win movements as a group of people. So in practice, I think a lot of these theories can be violent and hurtful, and I think that should be known.
Thank you. And we have closing